So at this point, it's fair to say I'm doing a rendering server video series. Can't say I planned it that way from the beginning. A couple days ago, I put out a video on the rendering server. In that video, I just gave some real basic code, talked about AutoLOD in Godot, and I compared it to multi-mesh. I think that video was also pretty good for demystifying some things about multi-mesh. It's not just this automatic performance gain that you get. And then, of course, in Reddit and other places in the comment section, people were asking about manual LOD, and that's the next video I did. So once you actually manual LOD these meshes of these buildings, we got a massive performance increase. So it was a pretty much 10x performance increase. We were getting 40 frames per second on the brute force multi-mesh version of this little scene setup. And then I streamed this morning and people were kind of pushing me further and further and saying, well, you know, I was hoping to see a benchmark directly comparing the nodes and the rendering server case. And so finally, here we are. I'm going to do a benchmark that shows you 250,000 quads in the rendering server as nodes. What happens? What does it look like? So the first problem, and the one that people talked about in the comments, is the editor. If you try to do 100,000 mesh instance 3Ds, you will crash the editor. I tried this on my PC, which is a little bit more powerful. I also tried it on my laptop, which is a 3050 Ti. Has an Intel i5, so it's not crazy powerful, but it's powerful enough to play most games on medium settings, some games on high settings. Does it affect runtime performance? Not really. That was kind of one of the things I learned through this process, is that Godot is crazy optimized for how it gets information from nodes into the render pipeline. And if that render pipeline state isn't changing, then the nodes just sit there and they don't really consume any CPU. So the next benchmark that I really want to run is basically 250,000 quads with the rendering server. So just to look at some numbers here, about 40 frames per second. And this is, you know, with all of these quads, that's a 500 by 500 grid. You can see our memory use is around 800 megabytes, 6 draw calls. So a little bit of batching there, and primitives around 375,000. So when we compare it with nodes, this is kind of what surprised me. Maybe it's something I learned a little bit myself. The FPS is basically the same. So the graphics pipeline is chugging away, it's doing its thing. At this point, the render state isn't changing, so it doesn't really care whether that came from the rendering server or the nodes. What you will see a big difference in is memory usage. A node is a class, it inherits all these other classes, those exist in memory. It has a memory footprint. So when you have nodes at runtime, the resource you're using mostly is memory. This is the real technical trade-off, and it makes sense, right? Nodes aren't for free. So I'm not going to linger there forever. I'm going to put the rendering server versus nodes debate to bed for now. I'm not saying that you should always use one or always use the other. I just want people to be aware that there's things you can do with the rendering server, right? I want to do a video on asset tooling for the rendering server, and I'll give you just like a little bit of a flavor for that today. Lots and lots of people have been asking about physics server integration, obviously how to get collision shapes on these things. And then I think an important one is I want to do a deep dive on the transparent rendering pipeline. So like full alpha, depth prepass, alpha scissor, alpha to coverage. I want to talk about all these things, but also just like sortation of draw calls. And there's some interesting things that break sortation in Godot. So we should know about these. I also could do a video on multi-threading. I think some of these concepts, particularly with the server-based, data-based approach, are really well suited for multi-threading. And yeah, so you can decide. You tell me what you want in the comments and we will do that. I just want to show you where we're going with this next and kind of some ideas I have about how you can actually author assets in this kind of workflow. So in this case, I have a couple different meshes that I've kind of pulled out. Number 15 in this asset pack I pulled, and then number 16. And then I'm just using geometry nodes to kind of instantiate these all over the scene. There's an interesting little setting that I think everyone should know about because geometry nodes are super powerful. But if you go into data on your GLTF settings, if you check geometry node instances, when you import that into Godot, they will get instanced properly. So just jumping over to Godot, we can see we have all these instances that came from that Blender file. And right now, these are just, mesh instance 3Ds. Of course, we're not getting our manual LOD. I have a little bit of tooling here where, let's say I hide this node, but if I parse the scene, takes a second. And if we scroll down here, we'll see I have this data folder with instance data, which is a resource. And so what I've done, this little script actually parses this scene tree and goes through all of the instances that came in from Blender, and it stores their position, it stores what mesh they used in this little resource file. now there's code to load the scene as a rendering server. And this builds on the code that I did from the previous video where, you know, you have the rendering server LOD and you can just fade them in or fade them out. In this case, I decided not to fade them because I was just curious what it would look like if they clip in and clip out. It's kind of intense on some of these, honestly. But yeah, I just threw in a camera here. This works at runtime as well. If I drop in this camera, we see all of our instances here, and we should see a very, you know, sensible FPS. I've got VSync on this time, so 144, and our, you know, our counts are nothing, right? 300,000 triangles is really not a big deal these days. So that's kind of where we're going, and this is how you can take authored pipelines where you know, create scenes in Blender, and you use that with the render pipeline. And yes, before anyone calls me out in the comments, I did add the exit tree, and on ready it loads the scene. So I think that's some cool stuff. I think there's lots of ideas and lots of ways we can explore this. And basically what I'm trying to do is squeeze every drop of performance out of this that I can, just to bring us a little bit closer to being able to render these like huge high fidelity, high poly count scenes. And I think it's still doable on like medium-ish hardware. So stay tuned. I think this is the last one I'm gonna do before Christmas. For those of you who don't know, I have a Discord. You can jump in. I'm gonna put the link below, and feel free to send me any questions or any comments. If you guys have any ideas about videos you wanna see, then I'm open to hearing those. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.